9:30. Thank you to everyone attending in person. We don't at this stage have anyone online. So I'll hand over to Phil, who will open us up with a karakia, please.
Morena koutou. Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, kia makina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, ehi aki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, tihe mauri ora.
Thank you, Phil. All right. Yeah, we have got our third workshop for our PT rating model. So I'll hand it over to Phil, who will outline how the morning will roll. Could I just remind everyone to bring their microphones nice and close and use them correctly. Cool. Thank you. Thanks, Phil.
I'll make sure I do that now. Yes, good morning, everyone. So as Angela has said, this is the third discussion on this topic, and the aim of today is to agree the options that will come to you in the February meeting for inclusion within the annual plan consultation process. We've got 63 slides. We've got 2 hours. There's a lot of things we could discuss in significant levels of detail. We've established some hold points through the slides to enable some questions and some discussion, but we've got some material to cover today. So Brian and the team will be presenting that to you for discussion as we go. I'll hand over to the team now.
Okay, thank you, Phil, and thank you, councillors. If we can go to the next slide. Thanks, LJ. And I think we've already covered the objective for the workshop through Phil. Go to the next slide. I will be sort of going through the first batch of these slides, I think, relatively quickly, because they should just be a recap for councillors about the journey that we've been on. And as Phil says, there will be some locations through the presentations where I will pause at significant points for councillor feedback and questions. So the agenda today is broadly as shown on the screen. It's a recap. We're looking for some feedback on some options and working towards a preferred option and what the next steps are. Next slide, please. Just in terms of background, back in 2021, Waikato Regional Council reviewed how public transport was funded, governed and delivered as part of the Public Transport Business Improvement Review, which has led to the work that we've done on public transport rating. Next slide, please. So during the long-term plan process this year, Council agreed to implement regional rating from July 2025. Since that time, we've had guidance from Council through workshops as to what the scope of the PT rate is and what it would cover. We've developed principles on PT rating. We've come to you with 5 options, which were cut back to 3. And we use those 3 options for engagement with territorial authorities and for targeted public feedback. And also just to mention there that along with staff heading out to each of the territorial authorities, we had a significant contribution and support from councillors, including Chair Story, at those conversations, which I think was incredibly helpful. Next slide, please. Just a reminder again that the scope of what we're talking about today is in the red dash box on the screen. So it is the rates component of the public funding for public transport. So that's the piece that we're talking about today, and ensuring that that is done as best as it possibly can be. Next slide, please. This is just a reminder of the principles that we developed. We used these in the territorial authority conversations, and we've used these to assess models throughout the conversation. Just a reminder of what they are to councillors. Next slide, please. So keep going through. Sorry, LJ, next slide, please. Just a reminder again that these are the assumptions that we used when we went through the public transport rating models. And just a note of clarification, the very bottom point there on the left-hand side, we're talking about other, that is other in an urban context, not other in a rural context. It's for clarity for later on in the conversation today. Looking at 226,000 rateable units across the region and looking for a fair and reasonable way that we actually apply PT rating across the board. The numbers that we've used for all these conversations have been based on the 24-25 financial year. Next slide, please. Just a reminder again, the three options that we spoke about went out to territorial authorities, are listed on the screen there. Region-wide flat rate. Number two was a 20% region-wide flat rate with an 80% targeted to PT serviced urban areas. And then the third one is what we're now calling the weighted distribution model, which was the Greater Wellington model in the TA conversations. And again, that features the serviced urban areas in there. There is a conversation in this pack, and I guess we're seeking direction from Council on how we deal with serviced urban areas as part of this, but we'll get to that as the slides progressed. Just next slide, please, LJ. Just a reminder again that the weighted distribution model, this is what it is, and you'll see on the next slide, this is the one that staff are recommending from the feedback that we've gotten from the TAs and also the public survey that we proceed with. And just a reminder again, we've got the central area, the city area there in red, the green central area in green, obviously, and then the regional areas in blue beyond that. With a whole range of differentials and multipliers in there that can be adjusted. If I move over to the next slide, this is where we sort of summarised, I suppose, the territorial authority feedback. There was a clear preference when we engaged with TAs for option 3. Although there was some feedback that this option did seem more complex to set up than others, but however, overall, this was the preferred option that we went out with, as it approximates, or it can approximate, the current costs to each TA. It reflects service levels, it is flexible, and it can be future fit. It's easier to fund new services in areas with a small rating base, and overall it was considered the most fair. Next slide, thanks LJ. As you'd be aware, we decided collectively that the best way to capture public sentiment was through a survey, which we developed and distributed to various targeted groups, People's Panel, community boards and others, and was made publicly available on the Busset website for around a month. The survey responses have helped refine the modelling and test what options are preferred by communities and ultimately formally consulted through the annual plan. Next slide.
Oh, just remember to use your microphone if you have a question.
It's on the next slide, LJ. So we've got a total of 281 respondents there. 84% of the respondents were ratepayers, with all districts represented in the feedback. In terms of the preferred options from the survey, we had a 36% support for option 1 and a 40% support for option 3. And we also asked the questions around the sub-options, so it was uniform charge versus CV, and the uniform charge was the preferred option there quite significantly. 57% of the respondents have used the bus, 14% had used community transport and 8% had used total mobility. When we look at the main reasons the respondents gave for their preferences, those who picked option 1 spoke about a greater number and a variety of reasons, their preference including the ease of understanding, wider social and economic benefits, and the need for future investment and environmental benefits. Interesting to note, though, that in that, the majority of the respondents who picked option 1 were actually from Hamilton City Council. So you could see why that might be when you look at how that plays out in the rates numbers themselves. And those who picked option 3 tended to mention their preference for user pays and the ability to have differential access to services and how that might be treated under the model. So if you go to the next slide, the staff preference is to refine option 3. So given that feedback and the feedback from the council workshops, So the preferred option is option 3 with a number of improvements that I will work through for the rest of the presentation, but I will pause there for an opportunity for councillors to provide feedback and ask questions.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for setting the scene. Appreciate that. Are there any questions? If not, we'll move on. Oh, yep, Councillor Nicole.
Just one, and look, it's been a long journey to get to this point, and I knew the answer to this back then, but I just want to double check. Currently, CV is the way that it's done in all the districts. Is that right?
No.
Or which districts are the ones that are going with a uniform charge in the present moment?
It's a really good question. I know feelings that.
Thank you, Councillor Nicol. There's actually a mix across the region, and in the model at the moment we have many of them using a CV-based charge. Correct is the way of distribution. There is a balance between general rate and a targeted rate that they've got for it.
That's right.
So, but CV is the method of collection distribution. Yep.
Okay. Yeah, but there's always a general rate component to all of them. Nobody's doing purely a fixed.
No, none of doing
Okay, so
purely
the CV
fixed.
component
Yes,
to all
there
of them.
is. Yes,
Thank you.
yep.
Just good to just cover that off. Thanks for my thinking.
Okay, thank you. So next slide, LJ. So the next set of slides helps explain the improvements to option 3 to get to what might be a preferred model for councillors. So if you go to the next slide, LJ. So improvement 1, this one is about improving the selection method for territorial authority to find business and residential properties that are serviced by PT. We go over to the next slide. So in order to select businesses and residential properties serviced by PT, we need to firstly identify residential and or business properties as defined by district councils, and then further identify those urban or residential and business areas that are serviced by a bus, which means that they do actually have access to a bus stop in that individual community. So next slide. So in this process, the first step was the councils do record and zone properties as part of their district valuation role. So relying on this data also enables Waikato Regional Council to very efficiently update the rates distribution based on changes to bus services and any rezoning that may occur by territorial authorities. So we are using what territorial authorities are calling business and residential zones. So next slide. And this might be just an indication, I suppose, on a map. So the shaded yellow area here represents an area on a district map zoned as business and residential, and the black line running through is a road. So next slide. Step 2 is to select the urban areas that have a bus service. And so for this, we're talking about where bus stops actually are, where that urban or whether that residential and business area is serviced by a bus. So next slide. Our intention was then to use the GIS map base we use for rating to run a GIS query and select the urban areas that intersects with a bus stop. And this is where we've come unstuck in terms of the technical, I guess, limitations of the GIS mapping system that we use. It doesn't work. This doesn't work for us. And so I know we spoke a lot about moving away from distance from a bus stop as a way of doing this, but what we're looking to do is to deliver the outcomes, which delivers the same outcomes in intent, but is slightly different to what councillors spoke about because of the technical issue. If you go to the next slide, the reason it doesn't work is because bus stops do not intersect with residential zones or any zone because, on the next slide, please, LJ, because they're located in road reservations, so they're not contiguous with the other parcels of properties in those urban areas. So it's very difficult to select those as part of the GIS mapping. We weren't aware of that, I suppose, in our conversations we've had with you previously, but this has come to light when we've progressed the development of these models. Next slide. Thanks, LJ. So this leads us to two options for dealing with this. Option A is to create unique urban area maps using district council zones for rating purposes. What this would require us to do is to redefine this each year. It will be costly and time consuming. It will require ongoing investments. So without regular manual redrawing, it will quickly become out of date with new subdivisions, rezoning by councils, etc. This will undermine the ability to adjust rating distribution to respond to changes in bus routes, stops and land rezoning. So essentially, our view is that the first option there, option A, is not really fit for purpose. And I know that is largely what we spoke about in the previous workshops. The staff preferred option in this is option B there. So we could select property using a buffer around a bus stop to capture the area serviced by a bus. As I mentioned before, we know that previously having distance from a bus stop criteria did not sit well with councillors. However, for the purpose of informing the model, a selection method needs to be applied to capture the serviced urban areas components for options 2 and 3. So we've recommended adopting a 1,200 metre from a bus stop model. And so our view is this maintains the intent largely for what we were talking about in terms of residential and business areas serviced by a bus. It is consistent with NZTA guidance on walkable catchments, and it still results in a similar targeted rate burden as per workshop 2 and figures used during the TA engagement. So if you go over to the next slide, LJ, what that would look like in the example that we had, this is what the 1,200 metre buffer zone looks like. The challenge, or one of the challenges to talk about, is however not every rateable property unit is captured within this boundary. And this slide just demonstrates that in some areas there are outliers that are outside the 1,200 metre buffer and would not pay the portion of the rate designated as serviced by a bus. Just in terms of how that looks, just to see how this actually is applied across townships throughout the region. If you go to the next slide, this is Tuakau and Pokeno. So if you keep going, LJ, to the next slide. Thank you. The dark blue dots there are the bus stops. The yellow on that map is zoned residential. The pink is zoned as business, and the light blue is lifestyle, and grey represents the other zoned category captured by the 1,200 metre buffer. So you can see for those two settlements, what we're proposing largely delivers on the intent of what we spoke about in workshop 2, which is designation of urban areas or residential and business areas serviced by a bus. And there's a few examples we can just flick through. If you go to the next slide, LJ, this is how it applies to Tokoroa. So it picks up all of those areas there. If you go to the next one, it's a view of Thames, and it largely picks up nearly all of the areas there as well. Go to the next one, LJ, so Taupo, and again, that seems to pick up the areas pretty well. You'll see there's some that are on the sort of bottom left-hand side of the screen there, out to the left, which wouldn't be included. And the next one, Tamahiri, and again, that sort of picks up all of those lifestyle areas there that are serviced by that particular bus. One to talk about, and I know we spoke about this a bit, is on the next slide, which is the SNP of Morrinsville. And because of the location of the bus stops there are those areas in the north of the township which would then, under this model, would be excluded. And again, look, I'll pause there for comment and conversation and feedback from councillors, because I acknowledge this is a departure from what we spoke about in workshop 2. But what we are saying is I think that the cost and the complexity of dealing with redrawing maps every year, that this would be a far more efficient and even more transparent way of actually delivering this in line with our principles. But I'll pause there for feedback from council.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for taking us through that. Yeah, it's interesting to see all the maps and how it would play out. Now, I do have a speaking order. I've got Councillor Nicol, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Smith and Councillor Kneebone.
Thank you, Brian. Love your work and the team. I haven't taken in from what we've heard from the district councillors as well. My initial reaction reading this a couple of nights ago was, I understand and I'm glad we settled on option 3 so far, but I think wherever we have the opportunity, we should take to simplify it. And so 2 suggestions I've got is the first one, I don't think that our public transport services are good enough in the regional side of things. I think the city we are, but not in the wider central and regional, to necessitate the difference for the business and the residential differential. I think there's a possibility there to get rid of a couple of rows on the table. For now, should their services reach a certain threshold, something like closer to what Hamilton has, then we could introduce that later on, but we could keep it simpler just for the introduction to just have them put in the same multiply in the same category. The second one is that as soon as I saw the maps, all the negative feedback came flushing back from last annual plan consultation. People struggle with distances. Why is it 1200? Why is it not this? And we can obviously explain it, but I think people don't like it. So my suggestion would be, and obviously I love where you've taken us so far that no, would not want to make unique maps and difficult things and definitely not put at risk the ability to go live in 2025. So option B is better, but I would like to take us back to kind of what we talked about, which is just the urban area. That is the district zoned defined area, and just accept that there are some pockets that are close to a bus stop that would then pay different. They're generally rural, more in character, like in lifestyle block and so forth. Because I think people understand that if they live in a town like Morrinsville that has bus stops, however close they are to you, you are considered serviced as opposed to being in this urban area somewhere else where there are no bus stops. But the adding a distance to a bus stop, I think, creates an anti-bus stop mentality out there too. And obviously the opposite is what we're trying to achieve. So those are 2 ways I would just simplify it, because if we stick with the urban zone, it's not updated that often. It's very easy to work with. And that's where I've gotten so far. I look forward to hearing what others think.
Just for the chair, just quickly, I just wanted to clarify, in the diagrams we're showing there, the grey areas within that buffer, they are not rated. So we're only rating the coloured areas in here within that, just to be clear on that, if that wasn't clear. Yes, I understand.
Thank you. Councillor Hughes.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Not similar to Jen's comments, but my observation and questions are related more to Hamilton City, obviously. First question is there a differentiation between the levels of service? Because I've got the option of walking to 2 bus stops. One of them is within 7 or 8 minutes walk, and the service level on that particular bus stop is about twice a day. I can go to another bus stop, which is probably right on the level of the 1.2 kilometres, and I can get a bus there probably every half hour. So therefore, there is a significant difference in the level of service being offered, even though I'm still within the category. I wouldn't, twice a day is not a level of service as far as I'm concerned, but the other one is an acceptable level of service, but I'm not going to use it because it's so far away. So I just asking the question, do we have an allowance in our modelling to accommodate those differences?
So again, for the chair, in the current model, city is the one differential, so it's treated the same across all of Hamilton City. So there's not that differentiation that you're seeking in that current model.
Even though there's a total real change in the level of service offered.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I'm interested in this 1200 metres. As you say, it's within NZTA guidelines. Up to now, I've always understood it was 800 metres. would like to understand where the 12s come from, or why we've used 800 in the past. It's certainly on all the planning, zoning and whatever within a distance of a bus stop or CBD or whatever. Secondly, similar to Jen, insofar as if you're going to include a town such as Morrinsville, you include everything. And whilst it's really simple to draw some circles and say, that's it, we got you. And like if it only takes in 2 or 3 square meters of a property, does it mean the whole property is included, or you only pay a proportion of that? You know, I'm getting pedantic here, but the reality is we're splitting hairs. And so if you service Morrinsville, that bit to the northwest there should be included. And I agree if it's not coloured, the rural area. So whilst we're trying to make it really simple, the reality is you can't sell it. People will not like seeing that and saying, well, I'm only one property away from them, so why should I pay? And then, so unless it's all for one and one for all, which is what you're treating Hamilton as, then I think we're going to have problems in the rural area. So we've got to come back to, if it's zoned, if it's the boundary of the city or the town, community, whatever, if that's the urban limits, including all the different zoning, business, commercial, residential, industrial, everything, like say Horotū, you've got the commercial out there, heavy industry and residential. All of that should be captured. So that, while simplification, is causing more problems. Thank you. So the 1200, 800, I'd like to understand that.
So I guess we've had to pick a number for the buffer, and what we've based it on is the advice from NZTA about walkable catchments to a bus stop, which is 1200 metres. So you could make that a different number if you wanted to, but that would be a decision that we would need to make. I guess this is the question, I suppose, that we're asking at this workshop, is how we do this in a way which is, as you say, explainable, how it's and also efficient and easy to actually to implement, I suppose.
And defendable is another, but to me, we're sending the wrong message. It looks to me like we couldn't make it work one way, so we just drew some circles to try and get the most people, and we can defend 1200. It doesn't stack up for me just on the face of it. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Kneebone.
Yeah, thanks. And look, just before I start, just noting your intro, Brian, can I just acknowledge your efforts and skill in presenting around the TAs too. I thought you did it really well, and yeah, really contributed. So thank you for that. Yeah, my thoughts are just evolving, listening to some of the kōrero. When you put up the Taupō picture, it just occurred to me that at some point there's going to be people within that little southern cul-de-sac, I think it was, that will, southern, I suppose, that will no doubt want a bus stop at some point. And how challenging is how complicated is the process going to be to adjust the rating mechanism? And then listening to Noel, then it occurred to me that if you did make it broader somehow in terms of the city limits or the town limits, one would imagine it could influence a stronger demand from people without a bus stop to have a bus stop and thus contribute to public transport. So I was just sort of thinking along those lines, if that all makes sense on the back of what the others were saying.
Yeah, I think so that area there that's not currently serviced, to actually include that as being serviced would be relatively straightforward from the rating model perspective. So you would just include a bus stop wherever the bus stop is on that map, and you'd apply the buffer zone, and it would pick up those properties. So it's relatively straightforward.
So that would be have to go through an annual plan process, so wouldn't it? Change the.
That's a good question. I'm not sure about that. So in terms of adjustments to the service model, I don't know that would necessarily need to go through a annual plan process, but.
Can we strike a rate, a new rate for those
Yeah,
people?
I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
Because that was kind of where I was going, and I just don't want us to run into that problem that we're trying to avoid here, where there's a disconnect between what the TAs wanted to do and what we were able to do, you know? So just, yeah, we're thinking about that one, yeah.
Yeah, good points, Joe. Yeah,
Just thinking that one through, sorry. Question for the team. On the basis of the principle that everybody pays something, the maps here, even the people who are not in the circles would be paying something, or would
Yes, that's
not be
correct.
paying anything?
No, that would be the
So in
unserviced
effect,
areas.
any
Yes.
change that we
Yeah.
made would be to the amount that they would pay, as opposed to not rating, moving to rating. So the question is whether
That's
that's
correct.
an annual
Yes.
plan consultation issue, or whether it's a tweak to the.
That's good clarification.
I
Yeah.
just grabbed it. It's, I mean, part of me thinks, well, even if you chucked a new bus stop there, even if the whole funding mechanism across the region carried that community for 8 to 12 months until such time as the next annual plan came along, I suppose that could possibly work as well. If we had to go for an annual plan to change it, probably wouldn't be that onerous, because we probably wouldn't be talking a lot of bus stops. But
yeah, thank you, Stu. Robbie. No, you're next.
Thank you. Yeah, the Morrinsville thing's got a real issue, because that development what you see on that map, it isn't even completed. There's a whole lot more development in that little triangle in the middle there that's going to head out towards the other road. So, and that's already planned. So the issue is you need a bus stop up there somewhere where that new village area is getting built on that Morrinsville Tahuna Road, which would solve that issue. So
Exactly.
that's the issue, is there needs to, and that is retirement homes. There's young people out there that's mostly shifted from Hamilton for cheaper housing, so they understand busing. That's the issue. You need a bus route, you need a bus stop
Yes.
next to that area. So that's the bit you've got to resolve. But it must be included. That other right-hand corner, that's a 50 years, those houses out there have been a part of Morrinsville. It's not new. The bit out this side that's just got the green tinge to it, like that's all state homes. That's been, that's 50-year development out there. And why that's not included, yeah, there where the red line is there, that's all old state homes. Like that's 50 years that's been in housing there. Why that's not included on. Yeah, that's what I'm meaning, like that. So there's some serious issue, like that other, when you jump across the Morrinsville Tahuna Road, that's where the Morrinsville Hospital is. So we haven't even got a bus service to the Morrinsville Hospital. Yeah, that's all a part of that subdivision that I'm saying though, like.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, Lockerbie, yeah.
Look,
So,
as towns developed and you add new services in, the model will pick up those areas.
Yeah.
I think I agree with your point that it'd be a good question around, is there a bus stop required in that northern part of Morrinsville that we've just spoken about?
Yeah.
That would solve the problem, I think. But it also gets back to sort of network planning and that type of thing. So,
but as Noel said, it still should be included in there at the moment, because those are likely, they're either sending kids to Hamilton or whatever from that area that are not paying more than just the general.
they will still pay
They're like a general,
something.
yeah,
They would
but
pay
not,
the
but they're not.
unserviced rate. Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah, thank you. We have Ben, and then Phil, and then Pamela.
Yeah, I agree with what Jen was saying. I don't understand why we've got these 1,200 circles, particularly that you can't justify them when the areas in grey aren't being rated. So you're telling people we're doing 1,200 and then you're saying, well, part of you aren't paying, and yet other areas that are houses aren't paying at all. So it may be administratively simple for regional council, but we're actually taking significant rating burden off the TAs. I don't believe they're going to actually drop their rates to cover the amount they were paying us for bus services. And I would expect them, as part of this quid pro quo, to give us updated information on the urban boundaries on a regular basis. We should be trading with them here. Otherwise, we don't take this process on at all. It's like, why? They must update their urban boundaries. The other point I want to make is at the very last slide of this whole presentation, there's a mention that rural areas and rural towns are unlikely to be able to cope with increased fare box recovery, which is now being mandated by government. So we also have to bear this in mind in all of these discussions rather than have that discussion at the very end, that some of these services are going to be unviable.
Just in response to that, the reason we're talking about the 1,200 metre buffer as opposed to drawing maps through the district valuation role every year is just around trying to deliver on the intent that we spoke about and agreed on in workshop 2, but not creating an administrative problem for council year after year. And that's what we were trying to get to with this. The examples I think that we've got there, typically speaking across the region, are like the outliers. So that's not necessarily a common situation. And what it relies on, I suppose, is, as I said before, network planning to catch up with this stuff and actually service those areas as well. That would be how I would see it. But I take on board your comments and I understand the concerns that councillors do have in that respect. Yeah, well, yeah. And what we were talking about with the TAs was, residential and business areas serviced by a bus. And what we're saying with this is that this largely picks up and delivers on that in a way which is administratively expedient and easy to deliver. We can go to option A, which is redrawing the maps every year based on the district valuation role, but that would be an administrative task that would require ongoing effort.
Can you not get the TAs to do that for you?
They will provide the information. It'll be through our rating scheme, so we need to redraw the maps ourselves, is my understanding.
Well, is that a negotiation point with the TAs? It's like you've got to leverage at the moment.
Yeah, but it's our rating base, and so we need to actually have our maps up to date for our system to work. So they'll give us the information, we've got to translate that into our system. Whereas this is about a bus stop and a distance and a buffer, and then you can create the rateable properties really, really easily, I think is the point.
Could we charge them for doing that transfer as part of an agreement for taking over the rating?
I don't know.
So just some reflections so far. It doesn't sound to me like anybody's in support of the buffer concept. I think collectively we're hearing from all of you that you want the urban area concept to be the model that we follow. Just reflecting on some of the commentary, part of the reason that I guess there's a balance between defining bus routes based on rating and therefore putting bus stops so that you capture properties versus running bus routes that work for operational reasons and efficiency reasons. And if we find ourselves in a place where we have to put a bus stop somewhere in order to capture rates, I don't know that that's a great outcome from a delivery perspective. I guess this as an example is an area where perhaps we've established bus routes based on both the directness of services along the state highway, but also to some extent based on the money that has been invoiced or is paid to us by the district council in all of these examples for the delivery of services to this point. Under the regional rating model, we have the ability to define routes that deliver services for towns in different ways. And it may well be that there's a justification, this example or any of the others, to run different services in that area that would pick up greater access to a greater number of properties to deliver better connections to schools or any of the other things that you've talked about. And we are restrained in that at the moment as a combination of, I guess, both the agency's money, but also the way the model works, where the district council specifies the level of service and then we deliver it. So under the regional rating model, we have more control over that, and we could do more if you and ratepayers and the government wanted to pay more towards those things. The wider conversation about regional rating, regional private share targets is a danger currently to all public transport, my preference would be for you to not try and connect those things now. We need to there are individual decisions we need to make on each of those things. It's hard for us to set up a regional rating platform with that in our minds. We need to make a decision on regional rating, and then we need to make a decision on services, and then we need to make decisions on other things individually, I think, rather than trying to connect them all into one place.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I've got a speaking order. Pamela, excuse me, Pamela, Jen, Mikhail, Noel, and Ben.
Good, thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for summarizing what you're hearing, Phil, around the discomfort with the 1,200 versus the administrative task that you describe. Can you give us more of a sense of the cost, the resource implications of that administrative task? Does it, will redrawing those things trigger annual plan consultation? I'm trying to get a sense of how big that is. And I suppose the other question I would ask is, often when we go out for consultation, there's a couple of options. Is there an option to go out with 1,200 or the flip side, the urban area? You know what I'm saying?
I do, yes. So thank you. Yes, so there is an option. That's a potential to go out with two different options in this space. Sitting here right now, I can't give you a hard number on terms of what the administrative burden would be to redraw those boundaries year on year, other than to say that the distance from a bus stop thing is actually a really straightforward GIS query you can put into the system and get the answer almost straight away. Whereas what we'd be trying to do with redrawing those residential and business areas year on year is, it's a manual process. We have to go through every map, every settlement, and to redraw that boundary to ensure that we've got the properties included. It's an opportunity for things to go wrong. As you'd appreciate, every time there is a new development or new properties come on board, those sort of things, the map will need to be redrawn again and again and again to make sure that it's accurate. This, I guess, is, in my mind, is a little more defendable because it is from a proximity to a bus stop type thing. And you could develop a narrative which solved that. But what I was mindful of not creating was an ongoing task for our GIS map people to do every year to maintain a system that, in my mind, I think largely delivers on the intent of what we spoke about. It's just the mechanism of getting there is the point.
Right. I suppose what you're speaking to is that efficiency principle.
Correct.
Because if our concern is defendability to our ratepayers, something that is clearly defined as in a distance from a fixed point, as long as the rationale can be conveyed, then that is, I would think, a defendable thing. But I suppose I'm keen for councillors to be able to understand what is the quantum of that administrative burden, because as often gets discussed around this table, there is a desire by councillors to ensure that there is efficiency in how we spend the resources that we collect from our ratepayers. And if this is clearly the more efficient and cost-effective way of doing that, then we should be able to articulate that. So I'd like us to be able to have that type of information available.
We can come back with those numbers, but my view is it is clearly the more efficient way of going about it, but yes, we can have those numbers.
Thank you. Jen. Oh, just microphone.
Thanks. I think Pamela's getting to the point of where I was going to go as well. So I didn't realize that when I was arguing for the going away from the meterage and going towards the zones, that was essentially what you were saying is option A. Is that right? When you had the two options in front of these maps?
Yeah, so option A and option B. Option A was just manually redrawing. Like, for example, in the Morrinsville example, it would draw all those properties which are business and residential and lifestyle that are contiguous with that settlement, would be included, whereas what we're talking about here is another way of doing it, which is distance from a bus stop.
Yeah. And obviously we do want the most efficient way. I don't understand why, put it this way. Two things I don't want. I don't want the people living in the very north of Morrinsville going down the street with their friends and hearing that they're rated differently when that, to all eyes and ears, they just walk down the road and it's like whether you're above the line or below the line. I think that is not able to be reconciled easily. I think that when you look at a rates bill and you see that you are in residential urban zone, therefore you pay X. When you are in rural lifestyle zone, you pay Y. People understand that. They just accept what zone they're in. And with Councillor Smith in my ear, we're kind of saying, how often do these really change? I mean, houses are not getting built fast enough, and a lot of our smaller areas are shrinking as well, some of the towns. And the futures zoned areas are well signalled in advance. In order to go live in 2025, could we perhaps not use in retrospect, the past year, rather than, having to delay things? That's another question I had. But I really do think that a zone makes sense to people and they just accept that they're in that zone. That's where they bought that house and that's why they're rated that way. And I think it's easier to explain on the tables in the back of the documents that we produce. Yeah, rather than a distance, but I'm still open and keen to hear any feedback you've got to that. Yeah.
No, I think that's a decision for councillors to make. I think what I've spoken about today, what was spoken about today, I think articulates, I guess, the difference between the two approaches, with the exception, I suppose, of the quantum of the dollar cost to council of doing option A every year. But
I'm just not sure we have enough services in enough towns that will be a huge impost on us. And especially if we were to simplify it, like, for example, when I said don't have the residential and business differentials for those low service kind of areas, only do that in Hamilton type of thing. Yeah. Okay, thanks. But yeah, if we can get more detail on that, then I should be able to come to a conclusion too.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. Mikhail.
Yeah, so a lot of the questions and the answers have kind of answered a few of mine, but the big concern that I've got, and I suppose this comes back to Brian saying that it needs to be simplified to administrate this in coming years. And that's the big thing that I'm afraid of, because the whole thing of doing this regional rating was for Phil's team it makes it easier, concept of doing it region-wide. But what I'm afraid of, and I'll give you an example of the Acacia Bay and Taupo, where Acacia Bay's got 1,000 new homes on it and they're wanting PT over there. So, that's just one region that is then how much administration is that going to take on the staff to do that, and then also come back to council to go through does it go through the annual plan and stuff? I'm just aware of just the extra work that this could create, just both in staff time and then, how much a TA's actually contributing to that. And then as Ben goes, because it's getting taken out of theirs, what is the TA actually doing, that will then still cost the ratepayers? So, yeah, it's just that bigger of administration that's going to create for WRC in the long run. Whichever rating we have, that's the big thing that I'm looking at, is how much it's going to, turn into something in 3 years where it's, a bit of a nightmare for us to administrate.
Yeah, thanks, Mikhail.
I guess district councils will be telling us every year what properties have been constructed in each town anyway, because we rate them for everything else that we do as a regional council. So that information about properties and what gets added to the rating database would be something that we would get every year. I guess the question that the team are posing is, what level of additional work is required for us to zone those properties based on what gets added where through the course of that year, so that the rate for that zone and that type is applied appropriately next time there's a rates bill issued. So I think there's aspects of this that are automated and we manage every year as part of our normal process for developing an annual plan and a long-term plan. I'm testing that. My sense is the question that the team is suggesting is there is a little bit of extra work that is needed to get that information right for public transport. But again, I'm not hearing anybody that's in favour of that at this point, and you're all saying that urban zones are by far the best way of doing this.
Mikhail, did you want to respond
Yeah,
to that?
yeah. That's the thing I'm afraid of, Phil, is that you've got to do that to 11 TAs, you know, and how much more work is that, you know, going to carry? And is that going to change if we are looking at, like, for example, Acacia Bay, then that rating will change? I'm not saying if you go with this option, but, you know, any other option that's there, is that going to create more work for staff? And how much of the rates are they going to jump up another, you know, 3 years' time?
So I haven't spoken to the rating team, so I don't know what the answers are on those questions. But the more properties you spread the rate over, the lower the costs are on each property.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I'm not sure that enough people in the room understand what district councils do when they do their district plans. And having been absolutely heavily involved in the development of the current proposed plan that's under appeal, I have a little understanding. And my concern, one, is unless we treat like for like, either Acacia Bay here or the Morrinsville example, you will run into great resistance when we go out to poll, no matter what it is, because one neighbour's in and one neighbour's out. But if you treat like for like, in a district plan, areas are zoned. You zone rural, or if in a town or a village, there's a zone, and that area is zoned, whether there's a house on a lot or not. And so adding in a house or not's irrelevant, with the greatest respect, Phil. It's the zone. And to change a zone goes through a process that takes sometimes years. And it's several years, and if you're doing a complete plan change for Waikato district, the commissioners put in future urban zones in various parts around the district. So they are identified by a different colour, and it's known that they will at some stage, when they become serviced through water and wastewater, they can be developed, urbanised. So we don't have, the greatest respect, Brian and staff, I think you're actually making a mountain out of a molehill. We know towns and urban limits, if I can use that for the entirety of industry and housing, etc., don't change very often. And therefore, you've got a contained area that doesn't change for years. So I think the issue has been an absolute mountain out of a molehill. We will have an exercise to do in the first instance, a one-off cost, maybe. And I accept that. But a year on year, there will be minimum, and in some cases, none in several of the TAs. So I'm not seeing this as a barrier at all, because I've been so heavily involved, and there would be planners in the building that could easily back me up on this. So unless someone can put up a counter argument, I don't think we need to worry too much about option A if it's a preferred option. Thank you.
Thanks, Noel. Ben.
I agree with Noel. My concern is twofold. One is that at the moment, the district councils are rating based upon the urban areas. People are used to receiving a rate based on that. And now we're going to change that, and part of Morrinsville will be in and part of it will be out. So that's an inconsistency. The other issue I've got sitting there is that, and it's a future issue that Phil talked about, but I mean, in terms of affordability of these things long term, you said don't mention the fact that things are going up, but what happens if you get a town that decides it doesn't want bus services or can't afford bus services, does it remove from rating altogether? Pyro, for example.
That's a good
We
point,
haven't looked at that
because
yet.
we are covering community transport and total mobility within our rating. So
So they will attract the unserviced rate in what we're talking about.
Sorry, yeah, I mean, Pyro at the moment has got one bus service, but they say has one person on it that goes from there to Morrinsville, and the
That's right.
mayor has been quite vocal that he doesn't want the bus anymore.
Yeah. Under this model, that's a serviced residential and business area, so that would attract the higher rate. But if the bus was removed, then that would mean that Pyroa would get the unserviced rate.
Yes, so I mean, you might find there's councils actively advocating not to have a bus service, or that one person doesn't want to pay double or triple the fees, in which case the bus disappears. So yeah, just something to think about.
thanks, Ben. I've got Robbie, Warren and Jen and Chris, and we do need to keep it moving. There's a bit more to get through as well. So if you haven't spoken, Robbie, are you happy to? So I can take you off the list, Robbie? Awesome. Thank you. Go, Warren.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, one's just a statement, basically just looking at the different models in option 3 there, and the difference between serviced residential and unserviced, and it's about $10. Just trying to understand for me where that community service and total mobility drops into this picture. So say Pyro dropped their one bus service, it's 130,000 a year, as Toby's pointed out to us. But they still have community service is running in that area. Are they still attracting these rates?
Yeah, so the unserviced
Service
component of
portion
that
of
is where that's the community transport based piece comes in. If you recall the map that we showed with the table, so community transport and total mobility are included across all of those differentials. So that's what's paying for that as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do we have any information? We're showing a cost per unit on what they're being charged now through their TAs?
We've only got it in this presentation only at the TA.
At the TA
model
level, okay, so
that
there's
makes sense. Yeah.
no breakdown, because I know ratepayers are going to be interested that now I'm being charged $17. I was charged by my TA, whatever it was.
Yeah,
So, I would also like to see, I think, under consultation, 2 options, and where that may land. Hey, yeah, whether that's the urban boundaries, etc., and the 1,200 meters. Yeah, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those points, Warren. Jen, and then Chris.
Thanks. I think simplicity for people is keeping things as similar as they're currently used to. And I'm hearing, or I'm thinking, district councils currently don't have the urban zone paying or service zone paying differently to the rest of the areas, as I understand. It's often been bundled up. So I'm just going to throw it out there that should we want to keep things very simple as a starting point, especially, I haven't looked at the numbers like Warren has, but if the difference in a lot of districts is $10 between serviced and unserviced, maybe we just do away with that for now and just go with that's your central rate or your regional rate, because it might even things out quite a bit. And I was surprised to see a lot of people were in favour of option 1, a lot more than what I heard around the traps. I understand there are some biases perhaps as to why that is, but people keep coming back to this fairness thing of everyone kind of the same. And so I think we should at least consider that if it's too hard, doing away with serviced and unserviced. And perhaps we could do that in future, especially as things ramp up. And the last point I wanted to make is something that hasn't been touched on yet, but that is the map itself. I look at it and I think keeping things as simple and similar to what it has been, I would do away with the work that we've done today on the journey to work data. Around the districts, it was questioned a lot since it was 2018 data anyway, and all of that. If we keep things to just, this is your district, therefore this is the zone you're in and this is the rate you pay, it'd be a lot easier for people to comprehend than, again, putting a little boundary over Morrinsville rather than to the left of Morrinsville and so forth. So that's where I've landed so far.
Yeah, thanks for those thoughts, Jen. Chris.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Look, my observation, and just, I guess, picking on Jen, Warren, Ben's comments, I absolutely agree to the KISS principle. Keep things as simple as possible. Which brings me back to the beginning. Why are we doing this? Why are we taking on this responsibility? Surely the territorial authorities understand their ratepayers better than we're ever going to. We're only one or three or four people from a group of people. And the people who are levying those rates and talking to their constituents on a continuous basis, I believe, are the ones that should be levying the rates and taking responsibility for it. And we then send the bill as we've always done. I just cannot understand why we're going to take things on back into council, which is only going to complicate things here, and hence these discussions that we're having today.
Thank you. Last one, Noel.
Thank you. Two issues. Chris has touched on a point about, why are we doing it? And if I go back to the LTP, and a number of people came in submissions, and Hamilton City had the highest submissions and Waikato District the next, and then all the other TAs had very little, 30 or less, where Hamilton was 300 or 400 and Waikato was 115, I think. They gave some pretty strong feedback about being rated and someone just across the road not being rated. So like for like, and I repeat that. The other issue is, when I got the figures from Waikato District, and this is like other TAs, they are paying through the general rate. And last year, not this current year, it was around about $2.50 per 100,000 CV. And it's a couple of 100,000 more, so maybe $3 per 100,000 at the moment. The reality is, in that fee, there's about 88,000 of administration costs in that $990 million, say, Waikato District was paying to the region, 88,000 in administration costs. Now, one of the things that I was hoping was the justification of bringing it across was to make it simple, and that 88,000 would be reduced. If we're doing it for no financial gain because of it's more complicated and more costly, then Chris's point about why are we doing it becomes relevant, in that if we're going to take it over and cost more, it won't be bought into by the community. They'll say, what the hell are you doing this for? You know, just because it makes it simpler for you to administer, but it's more costly, that's not justifiable. And I'm not here to put rates on people that aren't justified. So do we need to step back and have a rethink about this? Because keeping it simple and it's more costly, I'm starting to wonder, and thank you for poking the bear, I suppose, is this really what we should be doing? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those thoughts.
Point of clarification.
Yeah, go Stu.
I thought we'd already made the decision to do that. It's done
We
and
have.
dusted. I didn't want to come in today if we're
No.
going to go and relitigate this stuff.
No, we're not here to discuss if we do this or not. We've made a resolution to do it. How we will rate for it is what we're discussing today. Right, let's move on. Absolutely, which was why having all the voices around the table was really important. Okay, you all know your districts. And we need your voices. So, yeah, let's move on. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Chair. This next point sort of goes along one of the points that Councillor Nicol was raising just before as well. It's about consolidation of property categories. So we weren't quite talking about the one that you were saying, Councillor Nicol, but this is talking about, next slide, the consolidation of the residential and lifestyle properties. And so we are proposing that we would actually treat those as the lifestyle properties as being the same as residential, and that if they are within that zone, that they would also be rated the same way. The question we do have for council, though, is in red up there. We are aware that we currently have this remission process. For example, if there's no established footpath between a resident and the nearest bus stop, and where residents are required to travel through an 80-kilometre-hour speed zone to reach the nearest bus stop, that a remission is applicable. This currently only applies in Hamilton City Council. And I guess the question we have is whether you wanted to proceed with that type of remission in what we're talking about. It's current practice in Hamilton City Council. And just over the page before I pause again, just in terms of, on the next slide, thanks LJ, the consolidation of residential and lifestyle properties outside of Hamilton, it's only equates to around 1.4% of the properties. We think that is a sensible simplification of some of the property, not having a different differential, I suppose, that would be useful. But again, I'll pause for that.
Any thoughts on this one?
I just reckon stick to urban and let the lifestyle to be honest, like to try and get away from the complexity. That's me.
Keep it simple. Ben?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. You're still on your 1,200 metres, and yeah, I'm not in favour of that as the model.
So just for clarification with that, if you were doing option A in terms of the selection process, if a lifestyle property was contiguous with the settlement, then that will be picked up in the rate, is my understanding. That's what we're talking about here, as opposed to not picking up lifestyle properties in that.
Yeah, I think the consolidation is the way to go. No?
Can I ask you to explain what would happen in Tamahiri, because that's an incredible lifestyle group of properties out there. Some say it's going to go to Hamilton because it's going to be within Southern Links and the expressway, and Hamilton's desperate to get it now so they can get the rates. But the reality is, how will that treat Tamahiri?
They do have footpaths.
Yeah.
Well, they've got Te Awa.
Thanks
They've
to
got Te Awa,
Waikato District.
And
through the regional public transport plan 3 years ago, they want higher levels of service for buses as well.
So therein lies the issue. When you look at, and if you did this in an aerial photo, you look at it in the blue area, that's fine, that's all lifestyle, but so was all that around it. And so that's when we had some people come in from Tamahiri for the long-term plan. Some people were just outside of that, to the right here, at the bottom, outside the long-term plan, and they were challenging that, and people, the like for like in there.
So this comes off the district valuation roll. So those blue properties, as is shown on that slide, are designated by that district council as being lifestyle properties.
So are the other ones around it.
But that's not how council have designated it. That's the issue we've got with this. So you're saying before we should use the district valuation roll. This does that. So you ignore the buffer around the bus stop. The blue and the grey, the differentiation there is lifestyle properties versus other properties. It's how the council has rated those or put those in their district valuation roll.
Brian, on this map, is that the circles with the bus stop?
That's 1,200 circles.
So if we
The blue
remove,
versus the grey, talking about.
yeah, within your circles?
Yes,
or
right. Yes.
what about if we remove the circles, as people have discussed, the ones where the red dot is all up there, would they then become blue? I think is the question that Councillor
Because
Smith.
they are lifestyle
They would.
properties.
Yes,
They
yes.
are all right around through to Matangi.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
all.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, and so it's just that arbitrary 1,200, because you're on this, you pay, and this is what we got in the long-term plan from the residents that came in and saying, don't do that.
Yeah, but if it's, I understand that. If it's contiguous though with where it's an urban area serviced by a bus, and we're saying here in this case that lifestyle is treated the same as residential, then they would attract the rate.
Yeah, that's what my question was. That's what I want you to explain.
Yep,
The
yep.
blue and the grey outside on the left would be treated the same. Is that what you're saying?
If they are a continuous settlement, that's
Yeah,
how that would
and
work out.
it's continuous right through to Hamilton.
That's right.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that we would like all properties to be treated the same regardless of distance from
That's
bus
what the
stop.
point earlier was about Morrinsville and the Acacia Bay, is
Yeah.
that they're contiguous and, you know, like for like. Otherwise, we set ourselves up to fail.
Yep.
Because people say, well, my neighbour's not, and I am, but that's
Yeah.
unfair.
Yep. No, you make a good point. Just
you.
for clarity, Brian, what you're asking about for consolidating residential and lifestyle, is that what question that we're asking at the moment?
What I'm looking to do is not have a separate differential for lifestyle and treat them the same as residential. And so regardless of the selection method, they are treated the same. So it's just one differential.
Yeah, I
Yep.
think that would be simpler, would be my read.
It goes to Councillor Nichols' conversation earlier about doing the same thing for business and residential.
Yeah, and to Councillor Smith's points as well about like
That's
for
right.
like what the
Exactly.
current TAs are already doing.
Instead of a push mower the size of the section.
Oh, everyone's got those robot mowers, haven't they? No. Ben.
I think we've got confused here from the long-term plan process. The long-term plan process, when we were discussing driving from Hamilton to Morrinsville, a farm that was in 5 kilometres of an area would be rated for transport. And we got into the idea of there's a designated area close to a bus stop that now has turned into the 1200. I think we're simpler to just turn into what the district councils have been rating in the past. And so I wouldn't even change the residential lifestyle. I think if you do that, you'll have all sorts of complaints from Tamaheri, for example, who don't have access to a bus stop easily.
Just by way of clarification, if you're a rural property, if you're a farm and there happens to be a bus stop and you're within the 1200 metres, then you would not attract the urban area serviced by a bus because it's not an urban area.
No, that was what was originally discussed, is that the concern that were people who were far enough away from bus stop that were rated originally. And now we've come back from 5 kilometres, I think, to the 1200.
Yeah, from memory, Ben, that was part of the concern around that one was that it was CV that we went out with. So farms would be paying an extraordinary amount of money for per property.
Yeah.
This is a flat rate, so the numbers do come down.
Yeah.
But
it was the idea of a geographic distance from a bus stop is where we got to, whereas it's going to be simpler just to use what the district councils have used for their areas up till now.
Yep. So what I'm hearing from the room is that we don't want a distance from a bus stop. So have you got the answer that you need around consolidating residential and lifestyle?
My understanding is we're saying, yes, we'll do that to simplify what we're talking about, is what I'm hearing, noting the concerns that have been expressed.
Okay.
I
Councillor
saw on
Nicol.
the previous slide, the question was whether we wanted a remission policy, should that be
Yes,
the
there
case?
was a question around whether you still wanted to include that remission, which does exist currently in Hamilton City.
I think when we've landed, we might not need that anymore, but yeah. But I do have a point to make in regards to the next slide, when we're ready for that.
Okay. Stu, I'll come to you in a moment. I've just got Robbie first.
Thank you. I'm actually for to rate the urban areas, because when I'm coming to council in the mornings, all the outer bus stops in Morrinsville from urban kids trying to catch buses to Hamilton. So to school, and it's mostly those families can afford to send their kids to school in Hamilton. So why shouldn't they be paying the same as their urban counterparts towards busing? Yeah.
Are you saying?
And there'll be their decision to send their kids then or not. So that's their choice.
Robbie, are you saying the same as what I mentioned before about urban, do away with service and unserviced and just have one for the district? so that you don't have the urban people paying a slightly higher amount to slightly
I don't
outside.
mean urban. Oh, sorry. I mean like the lifestyle is what I'm meaning. Is yeah.
It's just a decision whether lifestyle is part of urban.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
we're
I think,
saying yes,
and
it
I'm
is.
saying lifestyle is a part of urban.
Okay. And the remission policy might be required, but I think we can get to that later on
Yep.
when we've actually landed on something.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, Stu,
That remission policy is I trust it's not a ratepayer initiated remission, because if it's got to be individual ratepayers applying for remissions, it won't work. It's just too,
yeah.
people just won't get around to it and horrendously. I don't know if there's a mechanism to a council initiated one, but to identify the properties. I just don't think it's a realistic part of the solution
Well-
if we go down that track.
I just wonder if we actually need it based on the differential model that we're going out with. So if all properties are rated to some level, so in my opinion, we don't need a remission because you
agree.
fall into one of those categories. Yeah,
Okay.
so if we could get away
Yep.
from remissions,
Yep, I understand.
that would make sense to me.
And it is ratepayer initiated, so you're right.
Yeah. Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, well, you know, I can speak for a group of people that do get a remission, live in River Road North, and the bus, they can't get access to the buses, no footpaths. And it's, my understanding is that group is treated as a group and automatic remission of the rates. But that's what I've been told.
I don't believe it's automatic, but they do apply for that and
Yeah,
it is granted.
there's
Yes,
a
yes.
blanket application made.
That's
that
right.
Applies to all.
That's correct. Yes.
Properties.
Yep.
Sorry, just so one individual represents that group and does, I didn't, yeah, okay.
Again, under this changed of the whole new rating model that we're talking about here, the question is whether if everybody is paying something, whether it's rural or urban, or would that remission be required? Because the lifestyle blocks for the area that's been described may be different or no different from the lifestyle blocks that Councillor Smith's describing south of the city, and on the basis of a new model, is the remission the appropriate method, or on the basis again of those principles?
That could be, if I may, like I know the area in River Road North, that could have the lowest rating applied to it because they shouldn't not pay, but they shouldn't be paying the same as the rest of Hamilton. If there is no service, and not likely to be, bring it down to the unserviced rate as opposed to no rate, because that would be inequitable.
Yeah, I guess it would depend if they're within the city limit or not. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Last one, Ben, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I think we should keep the option of a remission live, because otherwise we're taking over something that's been established and we're changing it and not allowing people to actually make a submission against it. I mean, even if nobody makes this option, or that one in Hamilton North chooses to do it, if you don't allow them an option, then people will hate paying for something they're not able to use. And if you give them an option to get a remission, you're resolving that issue.
Right. Do you have any clarity on the remission?
Are we saying that we'll keep it in on the basis of fairness? Is that what we're suggesting, even though people don't want to, may not necessarily need to use it, but it's a fairness thing? I
I
don't know.
think we keep it in for Hamilton to maintain the status quo, as Ben has said, but then having put it in the consultation document, it gives others the opportunity to submit that maybe it should be wider to include X, Y, Z. Don't do it, but if people raise it, then it becomes an issue that we must address.
Yeah, I guess my thoughts are that we are including community transport and total mobility now. So, you know, every property that we're going to rate will have access to that at some stage. The other issue within Hamilton as well is that we do have the flex service, which, you know, comes quite close to people's houses. So I don't know if that is actually reflected in the remission policy either. So if you added that one in, you know, that comes to the nearest corner, not an official bus stop. So in my opinion, no one within Hamilton really, based on the levels of service, should be accessing a remission.
Available Friday night until 6 o'clock until 4 p.m. Saturday night at the same time. That's not a service. That's a convenience, and it's a great service.
It's a service that Hamilton ratepayers pay for.
It's not a bus service.
Well, it's a service. Yeah, that would be unaffordable though. Councillor Sperry.
I just sort of add and perhaps reinforce my concern with the remission is I suspect the lower socioeconomic communities that rely a bit more on public transport than those of us who are wealthier are less likely to get as organised as your colleagues as well. So we just need to bear that in mind. Put in a group remission. Yeah. Well, that's a bit different, but yeah.
Right, we will move on.
You reach a conclusion?
On the remission, I think from the, let's have a straw poll. Keep the remission. 5, 6. Remove the remission.
Just noting it's on the basis that I don't think we should include it as when in terms of describing value for money, if that makes it doesn't quite sound right, but trying to the concept of the level of service cost X on the basis that you can do a remission, I think is why I'm not supporting the concept of a remission. So don't include it in that, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yep. So can I just have show of hands for that second option again, removing the option of a remission? Okay. A couple of hands haven't gone up. A couple of people abstaining. Right, it's about 60-40, yeah.
I think
Yeah,
it's in the
and
mix,
it is
but
a workshop today, so.
keep
let's-
it under consideration.
let's,
But I don't think we've landed on enough to really let you know. Yeah.
No. Right. Yep. All right, let's keep moving.
Let's move on to the next change you wanted to talk about, and that is the difference between uniform charge and capital value-based charge. So when we did the territorial authority conversations pre-engagement, we heard from all of the territorial authorities, with the exception of one, that they preferred a uniform charge, and the one that preferred a capital value-based charge. On the next slide, thanks, LJ, was Hamilton City. And I guess on the slide there, our preference would be to treat everybody the same, but that's a decision, I think, again, that for this workshop around whether we do apply a capital-based charge for Hamilton City, a capital value charge, or we don't. We just go the CV-based charge. And I think that's a pretty simple conversation. But Hamilton City, the feedback from them was that's how we do rating within the city, and they'd prefer to keep that. And I guess that's again a decision for council to make.
Cool. Thank you, Brian. Jen, then Noel.
Yeah, I mean, having been part of those presentations, I need to do a really great job with them, Brian. I feel we kind of nudged people in the district councils towards the uniform charge. We almost said this is kind of like the best option if you're going with option 3 because it's so complicated to model. Whereas after some of the discussion we've had now, for example, if you did remove the business residential rows, let's say you even removed the serviced and unserviced rows for the central and the regional areas, you end up with just 3 rows on the table, which is a lot easier to do a CV-based charge on. So I think some of the feedback we got on preferring uniform was more in response to us saying we might prefer uniform to go with this model. I think that if our services were a lot more advanced in a lot of these central and regional areas, I'd continue to go with all those rows, but I just don't think they are at this point. It's actually the city where 80% of the buses are where I could justify more differentials, perhaps, but I don't think we should. So sticking with the CV-based, since that's what everybody, at least to some degree, already does, is really leaning on me heavily just now, even though I've often been a proponent of the uniform charge. But I think the potential exists that if we simplify the table enough to make this transition and get away from all the things that kept us really busy in discussion in this workshop, we could actually go that way, and we wouldn't have to change things in the future, because if you start making it CV based for Hamilton but not elsewhere, then one day when you have enough services elsewhere, there's going to be an argument for shifting them to CV, and that's another hurdle to overcome. Keen to hear what others think though. Yeah, I would just simplify the whole option 3 table and perhaps consider CV.
Cool, thanks, Jen. We've got Noel, Mikhail, then Pamela.
I suppose for me, it's the principle of whether it's option A or option B, but the reality is it's the bottom line. And I just go back to my work with the district council, and you've got a, say, $10 million property last year would be paying around $250 because it was based on CV, it was general rate. And if it's a uniform charge, one would say the urban properties in Huntly, which are barely $200,000, they pay so little now, and probably most of them would be by landlords, but ultimately paid for by the tenants. Whereas at Farmer, the $250, talking with landowners, they were quite happy for the public good. But if you go to CV, I would want to understand what the difference from that $10 million property would now pay, because the work that we did under that I did under the long-term plan showed that a farmer at Rangariri who had a 10 million plus property would be paying $2,200 annually under that model, which was absolutely discounted, and which was a good idea. So whilst staff may prefer this one, uniform charge, what does it really mean? And have you done any work on what that might mean? Because it's $15 million odd to run the bus services. What does that actually mean in terms of cost to the ratepayers? You done some work on that, please?
The only work that I'm aware of has occurred through Waikato District Council, where we've spoken to Councillor Eugene Patterson, yes, and Vishal and others there. We've had that conversation, and they were going away to compare some sample properties like for like. But I've not seen the outcome of that conversation with them at this point.
Well, thank you. So I'm hearing not CV based for the wider region from you, Noel.
It's really no. I'm either or. I want to see what it really means in dollar terms, because I have no problem as a rural landowner paying public good to run a bus service for people who, gosh, I'm seeing my green side coming out, who can't afford it. And like, so I see the buses in Narrawa here at Huntly, they're full, because those people don't have access to regular vehicles. So absolutely needed. But then, where I am, there's no service, and I get in the car, and I wouldn't go to a park and ride because of the reasons I've articulated previously. So I really want to see what the bottom line is rather than the principle here.
Mikhail.
Just on, back to you, Noel, on farmers, I had a meeting with the Rotorua Lakes Community Board and predominantly all farmers, and they're definitely against CV. And I'd say so is Rotorua and so is Taupo. Just because it's those high-end CVs now, you know, going from LV to CV and around the lake, you know, properties are now 3, 8, you know, out the point, $12 million properties, and they don't use the public transport or haven't got access to it. We talk about footpaths to even getting into town. You look at lifestyle blocks that are 5 minutes out of town and got no footpaths going out to them. So and I've always said right from the beginning, my own personal view is from the feedback from my ratepayers is uniform, whatever option it is, it's got to be uniform charge.
Cool. Thanks for that, Mikhail. I've got Pamela, Warren, then Stu.
Kia ora. I just, I suppose, wanted to respond to Councillor Nichols' comments. As someone who attended, I think, all but one of the engagements, I don't believe we led the TAs in their feedback. We were open and transparent with some numbers that were put forward. And I heard across all of the TAs an appetite for uniform and a complete dislike to CV, and particularly for the reasons that Councillor Downard has highlighted. You know, the impasse that creates on people who have been in a property for many years that have seen escalation in the value and what that might mean in real terms for them. It was interesting to hear how widely supported CV was around Hamilton City Council. And I suppose that just recognizes what people are familiar with. I think that if we reflect on the very strong feedback we got during the LTP, there was significant dissatisfaction with a CV-based model in some of our TA partners. So I think that where we're able to reflect that differential is by adopting and what are we calling the model now? What are we calling the Wellington? The weighted distribution model. So compelling.
We need a better name.
But I think that's where we're getting that balance between fairness through a uniform charge, but recognizing that there is a difference of accessibility and utilization for the services that we can provide in different areas. So I suppose that I want to give Hamilton what they want. And if that is what their population, their ratepayers are familiar with, then I think option B in this case would allow us to do that. I suppose I am interested in understanding. I see that A is this preference from staff. Help me understand why it would be challenging to us to have a CV-based model within Hamilton, given that it is a differential in and of itself, right?
Just in terms of the staff preference there, that is around sort of treating everybody the same. I take your point though, given that Hamilton is treated as the one differential, as in City, you could easily put that capital value-based charge on that rating model there for sure.
And that is how they're currently
That's how they're
charged.
currently rated. That's what we heard.
So there would be no change. So again, if we're looking for
Like for
like for like, if we're looking for people getting what they're used to,
Yep.
then that would allow us to do that.
Thanks, Pamela. Warren, Stu, then Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. Recognising you've probably got 50 slides left. Yeah, I'd just like to agree with what Pam's stated there. Certainly the preference from the two TAs that I attended was not CV, but if it's easy enough for Hamilton to be CV, then well and good. My question is really around the weighting. If we take lines out or consolidate them, does that affect the weighting and then the figures we're seeing? It's going to, isn't it?
Yes, it will.
Yeah.
It depends on the magnitude of those changes, I suppose, as to how much they will flex and change, but they will be different. Sure.
So it's something, again, we've all talked about costs and bottom line and stuff like that, just something as it goes forward in the next step, like to see where those land. Thank you.
Thanks, Warren. Stu.
Just following up and acknowledge your comments, Mikhail, and look, just for the record, I've got a commercial farm that's only 10 minutes out of Cambridge. My CV bears absolutely no relation to the productive capability of the farm. So I pay massive district council rates. That's my choice because I choose to, if I farm in the King Country, I'd get 3 times as much land for the same price. But my issue is that I think we need to be aware of is that those, and I'll just use you because you talked about it, Kale, as an example, those lifestyle blocks, and we have them in Waipa, we've got them all around Tamahere. If it wasn't for a vibrant urban centre, they wouldn't have the valuation they've got, right? Because no one would want to live there if it wasn't for Taupo Centre. No one would want to live in Tamahere if Hamilton didn't exist. So to completely only have them on a UAGC or something for that reason isn't the right reason. We've got to make sure that they're paying their dues, because the reality is all these lifestyle blocks make a significant contribution to the congestion because they don't have buses. They've got to drive into town. Every bus we put on allows them more open space on the road to get into town. So I'm just not comfortable with completely doing UAGC because I just don't think it's fair. And I know this is a really hard thing to find a solution to, but now whether that's CV but capped or a mixture of both, I'm not quite sure. Or it ultimately depends on where that UAG is set, and maybe you guys think we can set it at a rate that's proportional to the impact they have on. And look, I'm surrounded by lifestyle blocks that all drive in and out to Cambridge and Hamilton every day. You know, they get benefits. Hey, and look, farmers, I'm one. They all sell off these lifestyle blocks. So we've got to somehow make sure that they pay their fair dues. You know.
Yeah, I guess, Stu, within the differential model, that those different things would be picked up.
Yeah.
I think option 1. The flat charge, that would be more unfair based on CV. So, I think, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're looking at here is sort of more option 3 around uniform charge.
Yeah,
everyone except for the city.
The conversation that my understanding is that is using the uniform charge across all of the district councils, not for Hamilton City, and using a CV-based charge, but then applying, I guess, in that the differentials that we've got within the weighted distribution model. So there's variance in there again with that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And look, don't get me wrong. There's farms in the King Country that are $10-15 million big operations. They will never get any benefit, very marginal benefit from PT. So we've I don't
so
know,
a flat rate for them.
Just making sure we consider all that
reflects
stuff and how we do
fairness as well. Yeah.
Oh, exactly. I'm well aware of it, but you get where I'm coming from, though, eh? Yeah.
What I was talking about, the actual farmer's lifestyle and the Taupo catchment, because it changed from LV to CV, it was a huge gap. As Pamela said, you know, you've got people that have had homes for 50 years and been on land, and then suddenly now they're CV. So we're catching them if we do all these ratings in CV. You know, it's fine. Hamilton are the biggest contributors to the public transport, and if they're happy to stay with CV, then I'm happy with that. But the common theme through all the TAs, which is, you know, most of the other TAs, which are, you know, predominantly rural, is uniform.
Look, I know, and that's...
I might just stop you two there. You can maybe talk about it more over lunch. I've got 4 more people and a huge number of slides. Just wondering if we could hear from Hamilton constituent councillors before we go on to the others, if that's all right. So I'll go to you, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I'm interested in the notion that Hamilton supports the capital value charge, because certainly the neighbour that I speak to supports it. They all would like a universal charge. I know the Hamilton City councillors, they had a vote on it, and it's very much split, as you'd expect. Most of their votes are split, but that's not what I'm hearing from ratepayers out there. They certainly don't want. They would love to go back to universal charge away from capital value. It is not equitable. And yeah, people are just not happy with it. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Bruce, did you have any thoughts as a Hamilton constituent councillor?
No, I've got nothing to add because at the end of the day, where we've got to today still is there's still a fair bit of work to be done by the staff. And I'm actually more interested in, they've heard the dialogue today and they now need to go away and think again. That's all I'm going to say.
Cool, thank you.
Right. Can I do my last
yeah.
one for Hamilton?
Yeah, and then I'll do mine for Hamilton. You go.
Sure. I agree with actually both Chris and Bruce. Chris, I was really keen to hear your thoughts because I'm very mindful that a lot of some of the councillors in Hamilton City Council didn't choose to speak in that workshop or weren't there. And so we only heard from a select few in that. And I have been a proponent for a fair while in these workshops of fixed uniform charge, because of the equal access that I suppose no matter how much your house is worth, you have, like it is for many other things. So really open-minded still. If it had been full CV out everywhere, I would have been also pushing to cap it quite low to average that out quite a lot so that there's a bit of fairness, but definitely doing away with all of those concerns that were raised around really expensive properties. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for those thoughts, Jen. Probably for me, I'd be wanting to see the numbers, picking 10 properties throughout Hamilton, different socio-economic areas. What does that look like compared to what they're currently paying? So, yeah, I'd want to see a little bit more data before I can, make a decision on that, acknowledging that it is currently CV, and like for like is what we're talking about. So, yeah, on the fence.
Same for both options. I want to see the costs of both options for the rural, non-Hamilton.
Yep, that's fine. Is it fair to say, let's move on based on feedback and still got 2 more improvements in?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Look, the next improvement I'm hoping is relatively straightforward. And that improvement was around initially setting the weightings in the weighted distribution model so that the total cost on a territorial authority basis approximates the current distribution. Go to the next slide, please, LJ. So that was the feedback again that we received at those TA workshops, was around setting those differentials so that they match as close as possible to what they are currently paying for PT services. There was some conversation about some of the distributions that we've currently got were considered to be unfair. That may become less relevant over time, but and then a common preference was for the differentials to be easily adjusted in the future. I'm proposing not to pause at this particular point in time because I think the examples will show at the end of this presentation will probably speak to that. There is some challenges, I suppose, if you're applying a region-wide regime, that there will be swings and roundabouts in terms of territorial authorities, some being better off and some being worse off under each of the variations of the model. But I'll discuss that towards the end if that's okay.
Yeah.
Bear in mind that Mayor did ask not to rate the rural area.
Yep. Moving on, I'll just move on to improvement number 5, and I'm hoping that this is relatively straightforward. And you'll know on the map for the weighted distribution model, we had that boundary around the central region. And of course, taking on board Councillor Nichols' comments earlier, what we've looked to do is to refine that central and regional area to avoid splitting settlements. Just clicking through the slides, that slide shows where it currently is on that particular settlement. So that's not a fair arrangement. Next slide. Thanks, LJ. So we're trying to draft those areas so they make sense in general. So trying to apply some logic to that. So boundaries should use roads and natural features to avoid future issues where parcels are subdivided. And where we can, we should be matching territorial authority boundaries. And so next slide. Thanks, LJ. This is what the current model looked like when we went out to TAs with that, the blue line. And that's problematic in terms of, if you keep on going to the next couple of slides, LJ, it's problematic in terms of where that line lies in some details. What we're proposing is on the next slide, LJ, quickly there. So the map shows the difference between the original blue boundary went to territorial authorities with a more refined sort of red boundary, which uses roads and natural features to avoid future issues. And where we can, we've tried to match with territorial authority boundaries. And then the way that plays out, I think, is a fairer outcome in terms of those settlements that were split by the blue line under the previous model. It's just a further refinement.
That makes sense.
I think that should be relatively straightforward. It's just not creating a problem with that line. And picking up on some comments before, I look at the Waikato District Council, there is a challenge, I suppose, and the reason why that line sort of cuts through the middle there is that closer towards Hamilton, there is a propensity for people to travel into Hamilton, whereas it's not the further north you go, and that's why that line cuts across there.
Cool. Thank you. Ben and Jen, just quickly.
Yeah, I just wonder if that further argues for using the district district boundaries within settlements, because that way you're not getting this line cutting through. You're using Morrinsville as Morrinsville, not half of it being divided. So it's a logic for the earlier comments we made.
That's what this is. That's right. Yes.
Yep, perfect. Jen?
For that comment of north of Huntly, well, I think that's somewhat to do with the fact there's a lack of services between Huntly and there. And my question actually is, okay, so I understand that the district boundaries are not matching as nicely as we would with how people use it. Main issues are Te Awamutu, Cambridge and Morrinsville. Are we then using the ward boundaries? Because my understanding during the representation review was that if we split things, often we will use the ward boundaries as opposed to, yes, say, making new boundaries based off journey to work data. Yeah, so just something to consider.
Can you just clarify ward boundaries?
Yeah, so
Talking
for
about our
example,
wards.
so the district
community
councils obviously
boards.
have wards instead of constituencies. And so I was just wondering whether that, but I've got Councillor Smith next to me shaking his head profusely.
Yeah, I just wonder, we know that nothing's perfect.
Yeah.
And there's no perfect
It's
model.
just people understand their wards, just like they understand their zoning, much more than they understand journey to work data, was my only point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something just to consider because it came up during the representation review as a thing.
No,
Okay,
thanks for that, Jen. No.
Can I go back to the previous slide just to understand that Heniwai situation, where the new boundary, because that global map doesn't give it to me. So where is it proposed to go?
South of Heniwai.
So I don't think it's sensible to go south of Oheniwai, because at the moment, contrary to a statement that was made by Tracy in this chamber, Sleepyhead housing, the 1,200 odd housing, is currently on hold. It's not been cancelled until such time as the wastewater plant at Huntly is modified, updated, and then that will be connected to Sleepyhead, and the 1,200 houses will be connected to Huntly, and that allow for. So I think the line needs to go north of the Sleepyhead development, because the Sleepyhead development will connect into Huntly in all the development there, whereas at the moment they've been suggested to go to Lakeside at Te Kauwhata, where there's 1,200 odd sections available until such time as that development occurs. So if you put it straight through and split a settlement, I don't think that's
I think we're proposing we don't go straight through.
That's fine.
Brian, can you just clarify this map?
So the red
north.
line is where we're proposing the boundary to be. The intent is that we're not splitting settlements, and that's what we've tried to do with that, just using natural features and roads and that type of thing. But taking on board Councillor Smith's comments, we can adjust that so that we don't
I think that does
create issues.
Right. Didn't. Yeah.
So this is now north of Heniwai, so I got that wrong.
Right. That's the sensible thing to do.
That makes sense. Thank you. Right, let's move on.
Okay, so This next section is just some improved versions, I suppose, of option 3, taking on board much of the feedback and the survey data we've got, but not taking into account all of the conversation that we've had today. So if you go to the next slide, thanks, LJ. This is a similar table we presented at the previous workshops and when we've gone out to the TAs. We did previously know this is the Greater Wellington approach, and you can see there that this is what we're calling a default scenario. So we've got in there the differentials and the weightings you can see in the table on the left-hand side, and on the table on the right-hand side there is talking about what each territorial authority would pay under that particular arrangement. So that's what, and then what I've got in the rest of the presentation is just variations on that theme. So if you go over to the next slide, scenario 2, we've tried to match the numbers as close as we possibly could across all of the TAs. And I mentioned earlier, there are swings and roundabouts in this, where some, in a percentage basis, some territorial authorities are going up and others are going down. And that's just a consequence of applying a consistent model across all of the regions. So,
Excuse me, I really don't understand what you're doing here. I don't understand the difference. You haven't explained fully what slide 1 is, slide 2, why they're different. Yeah.
So slide 1 is just the starting point, if you like. And so we're saying that that's what we originally thought was a reasonable model. The weightings in the under the title uniform charge there, the weightings are the numbers to look at. And the cost.
Does that include Hamilton City as CV?
It could include it either way. So
It's
the
just
table down.
it's the total for the TA.
Total for the TA. The table down the bottom
Bottom
gives
right.
you what the bottom right there, where CV based for city gives you the dollar figure per $100,000, and it's prorated out between a $500, $1 million, and $2 million property, what you would pay for that. So what we're adjusting here is the weightings in the weighting column, if that makes sense. So this is the starting point. Scenario 2 over the page is where we've tried to match, by adjusting the weightings, we've tried to match the dollar figures as best we could with what territorial authorities are currently being charged for public transport. As I mentioned earlier, the challenge we've got here is you're applying a consistent model across a region which has been rated quite differently in the past. And so there are, by necessity, some changes in there. Scenario 3 over, and you'll note, sorry, just back on scenario 2 there, you'll note that the numbers in the weighting column have adjusted, and so then has the cost per unit charges in that left-hand table. Scenario 3 is more of a heavily loaded city-based focus. So you'll see there the differential for city has gone up to 10 in this particular example. And you'll see that the impact on the rest of the charges across that as well. And they've all been adjusted in this table. Scenario 4 was adding more to the central differentials. And so all the others are kept the same as the default figure. So again, another version that we've got here. And again, you'll see those numbers have adjusted across all of those tables. And scenario 5 we've got here is reducing the regional differential, so that pay significantly less. And so you'll see that also in that compared to the default model, you've got those weighting differentials and the cost per unit have gone down. So all we're trying to show here is that with option 3, there are many different ways that you can cut this. And I guess sort of looking for some sort of a steer from councillors around what they thought the best outcome might be, noting, of course, that the feedback that we had gotten from the territorial authority pre-engagement was to try and make it match as close as we possibly can to what the current rate take is. And hopefully the challenges we've got with that kind of makes sense. Over the slide, next slide, thanks LJ, the blue table we've got there tries to summarise those different scenarios in terms of percentage change of what each territorial authority would actually pay. So there's quite a variance, I suppose, across that, and that's one of the challenges that we do have. As I said before, in applying a consistent model across the region. And there are winners and losers in each of those different scenarios to varying degrees. So if that makes sense. Because if we went back to a model where you were charging exactly the same as you got now, you would have a complete different set of differentials and weightings for each district, which is not what we're trying to do in simplifying the system, if that makes sense. So that's where I'll just leave my part of the conversation. It's quite a bit in that.
Thank you, Brian.
There's a lot in that, I suppose, but I guess opportunity here is for us when we go out to sort of annual plan consultation to actually, if we're going with this particular model, and noting Councillor Nichols' comments earlier about reducing the number of differentials, that might play into this as well. But I guess we're looking for some guidance around what is the best way or models to go out with.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I think any time we have these sorts of conversations with percentages, people always want to know what it looks like for properties within their areas.
Yes.
Just back of the envelope, sort of looking at Hamilton City and the CV based ones, pretty much any of the differentials is going to be less than what I'm currently paying. Scenario 3 is probably like the most similar. Then we don't have the big swings and roundabouts for Matamata per se, but yeah, also keen to hear what other people think. But yeah, I would like to see more random property data so we can actually, sort of see what we're looking at.
Like sample property types across the TA, if that might be.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And within those differentials. So, yeah, I know that we can sort of see that within the red numbers on your green charts.
Yeah, that's what is proposed under that particular version of the model, but what it doesn't do is compare with what's currently charged.
Yeah.
So there'd be some work in that to do that.
Yep. Just from a city point of view, most of those numbers are less than what I'm currently paying anyway. So I guess we've got more rating units within Hamilton City now with all the density, but that's fine. Right, I'll go to Noel, then Robbie, then Jen.
Okay, just wanted to make sure this is only based on rating units. So I know for Waikato District, if you've got a rubbish collection and you've got 2 houses, you pay 2 rubbish collection fees. So just making sure that we're not looking to make it more complicated by there's certain number of dwellings on a property because you've got households. I'm not asking you to do it. I'm just making sure that we're not doing it.
It's based on rateable units, is my understanding, so it should be right. Yeah.
Well, that's why Waikato District does it now. So I'd happy. Yep. Thank you.
Yep. No, good points. No, thank you, Robbie.
Yeah. Just wanting to understand how much more Morrinsville's going to pay than Tiara or Matamata. For me, that's what I just wanted to understand, because Morrinsville's inside the boundary, but the Tiara and Matamata aren't. So I know these numbers up there look daunting, but where's that cost related to?
So that's the total for.
I know, but it's not related to the town.
But if you went back to one of the previous slides there, the central numbers versus the regional numbers would give you that difference per property type, if that makes sense. So, you know, for example, Morrinsville would be like central residential, so 41.94 in this example, versus say Te Araha would be 13.38, which would be. No, sorry. Yes, that's right. Yes, that's right. So it's in the regional area versus the central, if that makes sense. Under that model.
Yeah. So that makes so Matamata and Tiara will only be paying basically what they'll be paying now, but Morrinsville's going to have okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. They just want to hear. No, but they're the ones that's got the connecting service to bring everybody to Hamilton anyway, so they've got the bus service.
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Robbie. Jen.
Thanks. Yeah, looking at the numbers in red I definitely still advocate for just doing central serviced and central unserviced, as opposed to so many options. And then looking at the table that you had at the end, as well as the numbers, I think that the first table's not too far off. And I went with a process of kind of excluding the ones that had, changes over 50% for anyone, which I think was a bit extreme. Therefore, it was scenario 3 and scenario 5 I kind of ended up on, and actually scenario 1's pretty similar to both of those. So, yeah, I think with a simplification of less numbers for people to have to look at, and those 3 that I've mentioned seem fairly reasonable. I again mentioned that if you bring back the CV-based rate for city, I think there's an argument to be made to consider that, to have a lower cap of, say, only $1 million, and sharing that more broadly, which goes closer towards everybody's sharing.
Uniform.
But anyway, but if we go with uniform, then obviously it's different. So, yeah, it's not huge changes. I just wouldn't want to have any TAs have changes over 50%. It's one of the guiding principles.
Yeah, it's extreme. Yeah, no, thank you everyone for your contributions. Have you got what you need from this one, Brian?
Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, we still got more? Ben, sorry, I didn't see your light.
That's right. Thank you, Jen, for giving us less than 50%.
Less than 50% service, or
Yeah.
because we've already got that.
What I wanted to know is, picking up on Angela's point, is what is the baseline? What is the current CV-based rate for the city that people are paying under the current model?
There's an indirect rate and a direct rate. So indirect benefit,
So for $100,000, is it 17.9?
it's about $35 for the indirect, and then the service rate is around 200, 205.
For 100,000
No, per million.
per million. So even if we go with option 3, Hamilton is reducing its costs, even though it shows a 6%
Well, I
increase.
assume it's because there's more density now, there's more rateable units, so each property then pays less. Would that be correct, or have I got it completely wrong?
It's
No, you're showing a 6% increase for Hamilton City, but it sounds like it's significantly less than what people are currently paying for $1 million.
So under scenario 1, it should be the same, the 0% increase. So the rates, it just depends on how, I guess they've done the capital value charge across the city, but that should be the same. So the differences here, I guess, is where you've got now rating differently across all the districts, and how that plays into that, I think, would be one of the complicating factors. And you see that play out in scenarios 2, 3, 4, and 5, where we've played with it a bit. That makes sense. No?
Because I mean, when I look at the figures, what's essentially happening is Hamilton is paying more or less, and that gets loaded onto Matamata Piako and Thames Coromandel. When you look through this, but if what Angela is saying is correct, that the CV per rateable value in Hamilton is going down under even scenario 3, then that's presumably a win for.
It's like for like.
But that's not what it shows under the.
I assume that's because the costs remain the same, but there's more units to divide it by. So the cost per property comes down.
Yes, it's just that's not what these figures are showing us. So I just wonder, what's the inconsistency?
So under scenario 1, it should be the same as what's been. The intention is that should be what's being paid now. That's how it should play out. I can't explain any slight variances in the numbers in terms of the CV rate and how it's applied, but that's how it's supposed to be. So this table here probably indicates it probably the best. It should be the same as what's being paid now. That's what we're saying. So
It's
0%.
pretty much of a muchness.
Much of a muchness. There probably is some slight variance here. I understand that, but that's not the intent.
It's not huge swings like what we're seeing with Matamata.
No.
It's quite different.
No.
So within the city, whichever one, 1, 3, perhaps 5, much for muchness.
I mean, and you consider that the rate take for Hamilton City is around 12 odd million of the 15 odd million we're talking about. It is the lion's share of the ratings that is applied for PT.
Obviously, from Madam Manapiako's point of view, if you're going up for consultation, people aren't going to have 47%
No.
increase,
But 47.
which is the status quo.
This is the difficulty with percentage.
Yeah, percentages are,
If you go $10 to $20, it's $10.
Mm.
It's not 100%. Yeah, it is 100%, but it's not a lot.
No more service.
yet.
Probably paying.
Well, you-
What if?
No, different conversation, but we'll come to that one. Right, I've got Noel and then Robbie, and then we will wrap it up so we can move on with our day.
Something to take into consideration. At the moment, we're trying to reflect and balance it on what we're currently seeing. I would like to see detail on how we go forward, because I know at the moment Waikato District pays about 1.1 million this year for their bus services. How will we ensure that each district's costs are reflected going forward so that there is no cross subsidy across the region, so that, and I know that's something that's come back, that we don't want to subsidise the city. Always the city gets a kicking, so why not? The reality is that's what on people's mind. We don't mind paying what's fair, is what I'm saying, what I'm hearing, but what we need to make sure is we can show the model reflects what the costs are within that district, and can we just make sure we cover that off?
I agree, and that's one of the principles, is being fair, so that's what we should try and do, yes. Yep.
But if I summarise the conversation, am I correct in thinking that you're all saying that you want to see a scenario of roughly the same as is being paid now, which is what came out through the council conversations, and one other, which seems to be either option 3 or option 5, scenario 3 or scenario 5, and you'd like to see some sample properties in each of the city, central and regional areas to get a sense of what that would mean on a real cost basis.
Yeah, and dollars, and especially within the city if we do uniform or CV. Yeah. Yes, yeah, so we need to tell the story well through the consultation document. Right, I've got Robbie and then Chris.
Thank you. Just for Morrinsville, would be interesting to know how much the cost would go up if the Hauraki service did stop, because that means that Morrinsville would have to pick up all the cost of that bus. Or would that service completely stop completely?
Yeah, why don't we take that conversation offline?
Yeah, I know,
But yeah,
that'll affect the Morrinsville rate quite a bit.
well, yeah, that would be a level of service conversation.
You might remember that during workshop 2, we gave some scenarios about, we used that route as an example and talked about what each district was paying towards it. So it would be that portion that wouldn't be included. Yeah.
The issue, I suppose, is we're no longer having that sort of serviced area-based, route-based conversation. It's more of a spread across the board, if you like. So if there is a bus stop servicing Morrinsville, they would be in the serviced central rate, and that's what they would pay. And whether it was 1 bus, 2 buses, or 6 buses, it wouldn't change it.
Thank you. Chris.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. I'd like somebody to explain to me the reason that Hamilton City under scenario 3 has a 6% change. Now, 6% on 12.8 million is a huge amount of money. And when you look at all the other scenarios, the changes are minimal. And that's an outlier. And I'd like somebody to explain just what that represents, please.
So the intent with that was, if you look at back on the slide for scenario 3, it was heavily loaded central city differential. So it's gone up from 7 to 10 to see how it looks across the numbers. It's an example. It's not, if we're not happy with that, then we won't proceed with that. That's just it's a way of showing how the numbers would fluctuate if we adjusted that differential. That's what it is. So it's just a comparator.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, good point though, Chris. I think within the more data that we get, what people are currently paying and on CV and what that would look like under a uniform charge would be quite good information as well.
Sure.
Cool. Jen. I've got.
It's kind of a rounding off question. I just wanted to leave today knowing as well how, Phil, how you're thinking this question is going to go when we put it into the consultation document, what kind of options, or whether you need to bring back and get more direction before you really know that. You can answer it now or later.
So our next, and we've gone, there's a few slides on, but our next step is to take what we've heard today and build it into a paper that would come back to you through the February council meeting on the annual plan. And in there we would include what we've heard today, those detailed costings that you've requested, and probably some draft consultation questions. Yeah, in my mind, I haven't got to that point yet. But my memory of the annual plan process is that there's another meeting later in March where you approve the consultation document. So between 11th of February and the end of March, there's a period of time where we can work on that. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. I've got Mikhail, Ben, and Stu.
Sorry, Madam Chair, I know you want to finish, but the other thing just sprang to the mind when you talked about the way we tell the story in the consultation. I think community transport and mobility needs to be explained in that, because that's one thing that I know that I've kind of pushed to the rural community or down our communities, that I do believe that it should be more going into that community transport, because I think that's where rural communities can get benefit out of, you know, say, paying their share of a community good. So is there ability, I know this is the workshop, but I'm just asking that, to even increase that? I know we increased it from 200 to 300, you know, through the annual plan. Is there any ability to increase that so it just gives more? And I think we need to change, you know, Madam Chair kind of mentioned it this morning, the actual story behind, because when you hear community transport, people kind of, you know, not quite sure of what that is or what they can apply for. And the whole story of the partnerships, and, you know, it's not just our money, it's other money that comes into that they get, whether it's through trust or through TAs and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's really good points, Mikhail.
Yes, it's a good question, and you're quite right that in the long-term plan we did increase the costs, the budget for that from our general rate. We also applied for subsidy from NZTA and were declined on that point. The fund is currently open for applications, and my understanding is that it's already, based on the applications received so far, fully subscribed.
It's oversubscribed.
Yeah, so there's certainly growing interest in that. At this point, we haven't included anything in the information that's come to you as part of those annual plan workshops around increasing that budget. We're working now on the reports that will come to you in that early February council meeting, and the question is whether you wanted us to include something in there and try to work out how we build that into the total numbers that you saw through that workshop on the 10th of December, or whether you wanted to propose it as a resolution at that meeting for further consideration. We haven't done the assessment of that and what that would mean for the total rates rise for next year, and in the context of this, what that would mean on the targeted rate rather than on the general rate.
Well, just I'd like to hear from the other councillors, but my own personal view, for a $17 million take for PT, 300,000 is very small when you look at how big our rural region is, you know, and the things. So yeah, I'd like to see something in the annual plan for that. Go out to consultation to see feedback. I'm sure we'll get positive feedback from it.
Yeah, thanks, Mikhail. Yeah, just Phil, would we need to go out for consultation, or would it just be an increase to what we've already got through the budget lines?
It would be an increase in the budget lines. So it effectively shown the group of activities chart for the regional transport connections. But you'd be consulting on it in the broader context of the annual plan as opposed to as a special topic. But if you wanted that budget to increase, then that would be the process to follow so that it comes to that February meeting for you to discuss.
Okay. Right. I don't really see, does anyone have any thoughts opposing that? But I think as the chair of RTC, Mikhail has got a great idea.
One question would be, what's the appetite in that space? Much on the principle, but on the sum.
Yeah, I'm wondering, seeing this is just a workshop, I like the way that you've raised it, Mikhail, whether we close off this workshop, maybe have some discussion and we give some direction to Phil to bring that back through the annual plan process. Would that meet your needs, Mikhail?
Yeah, I think there is appetite around through a certain amount of councillors, and I think it's an opportunity it's something that's good that we can show, through the consultation or through the annual plan, whether we're signal an increase in that or not, but just the storytelling around that to go with this regional rating and the option that we go to, I think is really important. Because that's something that will benefit the rural ratepayer that doesn't have PT.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, Mikhail. Just thinking of a number that you might want to come up with for Phil to come back through the annual plan. You can maybe don't tell us now, but just have a think about it. That'd be good. I've got Ben, Stu, Robbie and Warren. You're off. Cool. Ben, Robbie, Warren.
Yeah, this relates to what Mikhail's saying. So we've got Hauraki District here at $136,000. That's for a bus service that they say they don't want. They actually want the bus to go from Paeroa to Waihi and around the circuit. So how much control do the district councils have over the allocation of this money in future? And can it be used for what is deemed community transport?
So the model that we have to plan public transport as a region is through our Regional Transport Committee and the Future Proof PT subcommittee. We develop a regional public transport plan and we talk about service levels and we talk about investment in improvements. We undertake regular network reviews and we engage frequently with the territorial authorities. We've heard very, very clearly that Hauraki are not comfortable with the model that is running right now and that they'd like to see us investigate and then implement a new type of bus network for that part of the region. So that's very much here. What that means for those numbers and the future depends primarily on what is specified and how it's delivered in the future. We don't know the answer to that yet because we don't know exactly what the frequency of services would be. We'd need to go through a process of contracting and tendering to get a sense of what those costs would be. We'd need to get the agency comfortable with those numbers. So there's a lot of water to go under the bridge, but we've heard very clearly that when we redesign our networks as part of future contracts, we need to make sure we provide services in a different way to that part of the region.
Okay. Second point was simply in terms of the options 1, 3 and 5, the CV-based rate for the city, can we also check back with what Angela's got on her rating document? Because it appears to be different than the CV rates we've got allocated here. It's important that that's correct and the direct and indirect are all included. So just to verify as part of your process going forward.
Yes, we can verify that. Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. Of course not. No. Yep, it could be that this is a different rate year that I'm looking at. Yep, we will go with that. Robbie and Warren.
I'd like the community service one, maybe it should be ring fenced, because I know like Hauraki, they've got money sitting there to put into a bus service. So maybe those should be ring fenced in our own little zones. I think that's a real opportunity. And then they could actually get some other funding to increase what the services they want themselves. So
Cool. Thank you. Warren.
Thanks, Angela. Yeah, thanks, Mikhail, for raising the community services thing. I think it's really important for our regional areas. I'd just like to remind councillors, when you are thinking of a number, that we actually collect $511,000, of which 300 is allocated out, and it's contestable funds. So if we can just keep that in mind as we look into that space. Thanks. Thank you.
So just to clarify, what is the current amount that people can contest? 300.
So it's $300,000, and we've got over $400,000 worth of grant bids in the system at the moment. So,
awesome. Thank you. Well, Brian, have you got everything that you need from us today?
I think I have. I think it's been a really interesting and valuable conversation. So I appreciate all the feedback from councillors. So thank you for that. I think I have, yes.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. It's in your slide pack. You can read it yourself.
Yes, if you like. So, yeah, we did discuss this, I think, at the last the annual plan workshop just briefly as well. You would have heard the conversations recently around NZTA and private share targets proposed to public transport authorities nationwide. We are working on what it looks like for our region. And I guess for me, the way I look at this is that this PT rating model that we're talking about enables Waikato Regional Council to get its house in order and ensure that what's within our control is actually well managed. And a well-managed PT rating approach should see us well placed, even with the central government seeking to increase the quantum of private share funding. So it's an impact, there's no doubt. There will be an impact on this for that. But what we're talking about in this conversation in terms of public transport rating in the Waikato region, it should set us up to be able to deal with far better the implications of the private share increase would be how I would couch that. So, yeah.
I just wanted to comment on that last thing. Most regional services are unlikely to meet private share targets on their own. So if people are not paying for the service to meet the target, are we going to keep increasing the rates overall to make up for that fall off in private share?
Yeah, I think it is a separate conversation around the implications of that private share requirement going up. It could mean, I think, as was discussed in this room once before, it could mean that we do increase fares or we do increase other third-party revenue. It could also mean that we do have to cut services as well. So to make that work. But with the public transport rating model that we're talking about today, that puts us in a really good place to be able to deal with those changes, as opposed to what we had before, which was quite a fragmented approach to rating across the district councils.
Well, that's one view. I mean, the other view is that the TAs were responsible for raising the money for the services they wanted. So we're actually just taking that over and the rates will now fall at the regional council level. So possibly with less input from the districts about what they actually want. If Hauraki wants to move and we're rating them, do we actually listen to them anymore? Because they can't pull their funding. So
we would absolutely listen to what Hauraki District Council wants. And we've had that conversation both when we went out there for the TA engagement, but also separately as well. And we'll continue to engage with them. And I guess it's a question around what is the most viable and sustainable service that we can provide in the context of everything that's going on.
The other factor here is that we set the fares. So we have a zone map, and we have 8 zones across the region. The way that we charge incrementally for longer and longer trips is a model that we've developed over the years, and there are aspects of this that regardless of where the rates are coming from, we have the mandate to control that aspect of it, and whether the zones are the right numbers and whether they're in the right spatial delineation across the region is are conversations that we always do include within the regional PT plan, but they are also within these new rules. There is a requirement for the next version of the regional PT plan to include a fares policy, and a whole bunch of work around the parameters for fare setting need to be considered within that aspect, which would be an appendix to the regional PT plan, which we're reviewing next year.
Last one, Stu, and then we'll close.
I often feel like we're on a bit of this journey is a bit of a means to an end, but just curious, and maybe you don't know, but places like London and Europe where PT is just an integral part of the transport system for probably the majority, what's their private share contribution like? Or is it?
Yeah, I can't comment on European examples, but I can comment just briefly on a couple of Australian ones where
Right.
I know, for example, the Victorian government and the Queensland government have taken a very different approach where they've actually capped and pushed down fares for public transport
Oh,
because of the cost of living crisis as a way of alleviating that.
Okay, yeah.
Our approach in New Zealand is a different approach to that. So
Yeah.
that's been a different way of approaching it, I think, from the central government point of view.
Yeah, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, no, thanks, Brian.
Perhaps we could send you on a European tour to find out that information.
Well, perhaps you could, yes.
I'm sure that definitely would like to go.
All right. Thank you everyone for your time today. Yeah, really good feedback. Thank you. Thank you to all the staff in the room. Appreciate your time on this. Phil, could you close us off with a karakia, please?
Kia whakaerea te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia tukuri whakataha ai, kia tukuri whakataha ai, hui e, tā
Thank
kie.
you. Thank you, everyone.